Political scientists today are all fucking idiots. I mean it. While the people who studied political science go out and study the specific politics of Yemen or some shit, I'm doing God's work by trying to map niche ideologies like 12 people unironically believe onto a political spectrum. While I have been hardened by the growing momentum of this movement, it's important that we all understand each other before we fight side by side along with each other. As a result, we should probably talk about the many different kinds of extremists. But what is political extremism? For the purposes of this video, I'm going to describe three axes by which someone can be an extremist in. These are the economic axis, the cultural axis, and the statist axis. You can think of the difference between right and left as proclivity towards hierarchies. The economic far right believes in as little redistribution of wealth as possible in the form of unregulated capitalism, while the economic far left believes in completely equal redistribution of wealth. That's why most far leftists are some variant of communism. Speaking of seizing the means of production, the cultural far right seeks to seize the means of reproduction. The far cultural right is about the preservation of cultures to the extreme. So much preservation, in fact, that it actually regresses back to culture that previously existed. You know, traditional things like family values, cultural customs, and genocide. The far cultural left, on the other hand, believes in the acceleration of all people towards equality at any cost. You can think of the cultural left versus cultural right divide as progressivism versus traditionalism. The governmental axis separates anarchists from totalitarians. Anarchist society has no state, maybe a government, but not a state. In contrast, a totalitarian government is nothing but a state. Totalitarianism includes, at least in practice, fascism and communism. You can tell if an ideology is anarchist based off of whether or not it has anarcho in front of it. This is true. Whenever you add anarcho in front of an ideology, it makes it sound way cooler. Ah, nah, babe. I'm not one of those lame inbred monarchists. I'm one of those cool anarcho-monarchists. That means I'm inbred and I hate the government. Ugh. Alright, now for the ideologies themselves. The word communism describes a lot of far-left ideologies, but all of them are authoritarian, at least in practice, culturally left and economically left. Communism is essentially the ideology of Marxism put into practice. Marxism advocates for the equality of all people, everyone takes what they need and gives what they can, and some of the offshoots include Maoism for China, Marxist-Leninism for Russia, Trotskyism, Stalinism. Communists form the national identity of the Anti-Centrism organization. They don't play that well with others, so keep them away from the other ideologies. And the sparrows. We need sparrows, guys. Stop killing all the sparrows. The sadists are a variant of Marxist-Leninism. They believe that the best way to destroy capitalism is with a preemptive nuclear strike that causes the world revolution to happen, in which all people across the globe throw off their chains and revolt against their capitalist oppressors. They also believe in communist aliens, that is to say, that all aliens that could possibly visit Earth must be communists, because otherwise they would never have gotten the technology capable of leaving their home planet to come to Earth, because no capitalist society has ever invented space travel. So they're basically just Marxist-Leninists, but wackier? This is why I've decided to add a fourth spectrum by which we will measure extremism, and that's the wacky spectrum. Sadism is economically and culturally left, authoritarian, and also very, very wacky. Fascism. Fascism is a culturally far-right ideology that advocates for national rebirth, typically through the use of nationalism. But fascists aren't just nationalists, they're actually called ultranationalists, which is a term political scientists use to say, holy shit, dude, cool it on the nationalism. Ultranationalists want to use nationalism to effect a cultural rebirth. In a sense, they're so far culturally right that instead of just preserving tradition, they actually want to turn back the clock and go back to some previous time where tradition was way cooler. For example, the Nazis sought a rebirth of their cultural past, which they viewed to be the Aryan race. Someone who's moderately culturally right might look at their nation and say, you know, it was a lot better 50 years ago. And someone who's very far culturally right might look at their country and say, you know, my country was a lot better 60,000 years ago in an alternate timeline where my people was kings. The cultural right is typically against immigration, but the cultural far right is so far against immigration that they actually want something called an ethno-state, which basically states that whoever was in the country in the first place gets to kick everybody who just came in out and make a state just of people who belong there. Wow, I didn't know fascists were so supportive of indigenous sovereignty. There are a lot of different kinds of fascism. Each kind of fascism sort of a different filter by which to remove people from your society. So, for example, you could have race-based fascism, for example, white fascism. You could have state-based fascism, for example, American fascism. And you could have religious-based fascism, for example, Islamofascism or Christian fascism. Different kinds of fascism sometimes, but not always, intersect. Third positionists. Fascism, by definition, is a totalitarian, culturally right ideology. But it is what I would call economically variable, which is to say that the word fascist only describes where someone stands on the statist axis and on the cultural axis. It doesn't actually describe where someone stands on an economic axis. That means that there's many different kinds of fascists across the economic spectrum. Third positionism is a superset that includes things like Nazism, Strasserism, Nazbol, and ecofascism. Third positionists often identify themselves as being beyond left and right, like this magnificent comment reveals. I have ascended, Kakarot. I am beyond your simplistic definitions of left and right. I am a Strasserist. In reality, third positionists are just radical cultural right-wingers with the wacky level enhanced quite a bit. You see, once you become far enough right-wing, you run out of wacky right-wing ideologies to incorporate into your own ideology, and then you have to go into the left side looking for wacky ideologies over there to make your ideology more wacky. Ecofascism is just regular fascism, but they claim to care about the environment more, which is a culturally left thing to do. Strasserism and National Bolshevikism are both just economically left forms of fascism. Anarcho-fascism is just fascism without a state. Nazis were economically center because they did privatize some things, but they also had some socialist policies, which kind of evens them out. Economically center. What fucking cucks. Pick a side, you fucking fence-sitters. The best example of an economically right fascist is Augusto Pinochet. Augusto Pinochet was a Chilean dictator that created an economically right-wing totalitarian regime in Chile. He privatized a lot of Chile while also simultaneously killing lots and lots and lots of people. As far as economically and culturally right-wing authoritarians go, Pinochet is the peak. Those wacky Chileans. Oh, he was installed by the American government? That makes sense, too. All of these so-called third positionists are just variations of fascism, and they just sometimes throw in a wacky left-wing ideology to keep things fresh. I can't wait for LGBTQ fascism, where we finally get the LGBTQ ethno-state. Oh, but the Nazis were leftists! I'm gonna take this opportunity to address something that I get a lot, which is that fascists are left-wing. If you believe this, you have been lied to by someone you trust, and I'm not going to try to change your mind on this, because that doesn't happen a lot on the internet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask a favor from you. Open a tab, type fascism into that tab, press the enter key, click on the very first link that pops up and read the first sentence there. You'll notice that you are on a Wikipedia page, with the first sentence highlighted being, fascism is a radical right-wing ideology. Okay? Now, I know that Wikipedia is controlled by the Jews. I know. Nothing is real, and there is no consensus on anything, post-truth, etc., etc. But I want you to know that every time you call a fascist left-wing, and this is true, a political scientist blows their fucking brains out. Nazbol. So I mentioned Nazbol earlier, but what isn't Nazbol? The alt-center keeps trying to prove something called horseshoe theory, which is essentially that the far left and the far right are exactly the same. This is, of course, bullshit. Nazis and communists are very, very, very fundamentally different ideologies. But then you have Nazi communists running around, and it gets harder to disprove. You can think of a Nazbol as a communist Nazi, because they have the economic policy of the communists, but the cultural policy of the Nazis. The Nazbols are essential to our organization because they bridge the gap between the leftist totalitarians and the rightist totalitarians. National Bolsheviks emerged near World War II in Russia. Strasserism is an ideology very, very, very similar to National Bolshevikism, and you can basically just think of it as a German brand of the same idea. You might think Strasserists and Nazbols are a totalitarian center of some kind, but they're actually, they're economically left, they're culturally right, there is no center about them, so they get a pass. Monarchism. Monarchism is a culturally and economically right-wing system of governance that is also authoritarian. Monarchists believe in monarchy, so they want a king and a queen to rule over them. Monarchists are often accused of being inbred. As someone who comes from a long line of monarchists, me, my mom aunt, and my dad uncle would all disagree with you. Sometimes I get cut and I just keep bleeding and I don't know why. Inbreeding. More like inbleeding. Seriously, I'm gonna die. Transhumanists. Transhumanists just want robot arms. It's not really political. They just want robot arms. I'm not sure why they're on this list. Anarcho-capitalists. Anarcho-capitalists, also called ANCAPs, are where we get our money sense from. Anarcho-capitalists believe that capitalism, not the state, should run the world. Anarcho-capitalists are clearly economically far right. They believe that unregulated capitalism is the way to go, and to do this they believe in an abolishment of the state, so they're clearly anarchists. But where are they culturally? Well, you would think that this stereotypical anarcho-capitalist would not care if someone was gay, or bi, or trans, as long as they made money. Anything that makes money is good for the anarcho-capitalist, and everything else is put aside. But a lot of anarcho-capitalists actually care very deeply about things like the family unit and, restricting abortion, that kind of stuff. So culturally right things. This is because anarcho-capitalists are what I would call culturally variable. That is to say, the label ANCAP describes governmental positions and economic positions, but not cultural positions. So you could have culturally left ANCAPs and culturally right ANCAPs. Anarcho-fascism. Aha, you thought we were done with fascism. Nope, there's more brands. Anarcho-fascism believes that humanity should organize itself into ethnic groups in a stateless society. Anarcho-fascists are fascists, so they're, you guessed it, culturally far right. They're also clearly anarchists, but then they're economically variable. So let's say there was someone called Mefin Stolinu, who claimed to be an anarcho-capitalist, so he's a anarchist who's economically right, but then he also says he cares very deeply about stuff like, restricting abortion and, the family unit is very important and, we should get all these minorities out of our country. Well, then, that guy is, I would say, more of an anarcho-fascist that is economically right-wing than an anarcho-capitalist. Or if you wanted to call him an anarcho-capitalist, I guess you could just call him like a culturally far-right anarcho-capitalist. But that's just essentially the terms culturally far-right anarcho-capitalist and economically far-right anarcho-fascist. Those are interchangeable terms. They mean the same thing. You're an anarchist, you're culturally far-right, and you're economically far-right. So that's where Mefin Stolinu would be in this hypothetical situation. Again, the reason you don't see the distinction in these ideologies very much is because these ideologies are very, very niche already. But why have a niche ideology when you can have an ideology so fucking niche that the only thing that pops up when you Google it is you explaining the ideology? Nice. Anarcho-communism. Anarcho-communists are our first variant of leftist anarchism. They are communists, but minus the state. When you hear someone refer to anarchists, they're typically referring to these guys. Anarcho-communists are the unifying members of our organization that will make sure everybody gets along. Just keep them away from the fascists. You'll often see anarcho-communists, punching a fascist in the face. And you might say, well, that's not very anarcho of you, brother. You're supposed to let people do whatever you want because you're an anarchist. And an anarcho-communist would say, well, I want to punch this Nazi in the face, and as a result, I'm going to do it. They wouldn't support a state silencing that Nazi, but then they would support, themselves of their own free volition, gathering up some of their friends and punching Nazis in the face. We've talked about the main kinds of anarchist ideologies, so now let's talk about the lesser-known anarchist ideologies in ascending order of wackiness. Queer anarchism. It's anarchism, but it's queer. There's also anarcho-feminism. You may ask why queer anarchism and anarcho-feminism don't just team up. But the answer for that is because why have one niche ideology when you can have two even nicher ideologies? Anarcho-pacifism. Anarcho-pacifists believe in dismantling the state non-violently. Good luck. The anarcho-pacifist was born when he saw a fellow anarchist throw a Molotov through a bank window, and he was like, "Oh, well, why do we got to do that? Can we just ask the banks to go away? Ooh, I'm not confrontational." I mean, what? You want to affect social change through peace and discourse and law? Grab a Molotov, you cuck. Anarcho-primitivist. The anarcho-primitivist, also called the Anprim, believes in a return to a state of being that was before technology existed. So depending on what kind of Anprim you're talking to, this is either before the dawn of, the Industrial Revolution, or maybe even before things like farming. You may ask, how are we going to feed 7 billion people with no technology whatsoever? The answer is, we're not. They're going to starve to death. In this way, anarcho-primitivism would cause more deaths than any other ideology on this list. But at least they're not centrists. Anarcho-transhumanism. They just want robot limbs, and who can blame them? Everyone wants robot limbs. They've decided to attach their ideology to anarchism because they think anarchism will get them robot limbs faster, and honestly, more power to them and their robot limbs. Anarcho-monarchism. Anarcho-monarchism is... Wait, what the fuck? Anarcho-monarchism wants a king or a queen to rule over an anarchist society. So the role of the king or the queen would be just only to crush whatever state starts to emerge. So the only purpose of the state is to crush the state. Do you think the human mind was a mistake? Anarcho-Posadism. We're reaching wacky levels that shouldn't even be possible. Now, you may notice that all of these ideologies are wildly different. Doubters of the anti-centrism movement will claim that all of us extremists are fundamentally too different to work together for a common goal. But the recent mobilization of the anti-centrism community has proven the opposite. We are all extremists. We are all dreamers. We are all dissatisfied with the status quo, and we all want change. We want to redistribute the means of genocide evenly across all peoples. We want to seize the means of reproduction and give it to undocumented immigrants. I will be the totalitarian leader you crave to lead you into an anarchist utopia. I want the transhumanists to build us robot arms as the anarcho-pacifists look on in horror and awe. I want the monarchists to marry their sisters as the Posadists start nuclear war. I want the communists to seize the means of production and then the anarcho-primitivists to throw the means of production away and have everybody starve. Soon, abortion will only be legal for centrists, and mandatory too, so we don't have any more of them. As a radical leftist, we need to put our differences aside and work together towards a common goal, and as a radical rightist, that common goal should be killing groups of people. Stay vigilant, my brothers, sisters, and everything in between. The non-binary state will be glorious. We will make sex changes mandatory for TERFs. We will sell swerfs into profitable sex slavery for our ANCAP brethren. We will nuke the Middle East. We will enact the left no state. Because I don't care how the world changes, I just want it to change. Every day our movement grows in strength. Every day the winds of change lick at the fire around the fence. And every day that fire grows. Soon the fence will be ashes. Soon the fence sitters will be dust. Because remember, if it's extreme, it's on our team.
Every extreme is on the same team. Every extreme is on the same team. Every extreme is on the same team. Every extreme is on the same team. The ANCAPs are gonna make us some cash. The Nazis are gonna bring the fash. The ANCOMs are gonna let us get along. The commies are gonna sing 6 songs. The monarchists will kiss the cis. The stressfulest pacifists will protest this quick. The Nas will fight, will unite left and right. The transhumanists will bring mobile arms to a knife fight. It's not about what separates us, anarchist, rightist, leftist, statist. It's about what brings us together. We all want a world without centrists forever. So Pinochet is gonna make it with Stalin. Nazi Noam Chomsky is a motherfucking stallion. I'm not really sure what anarcho-syndicalist means, but who gives a fuck? They're on our team. Yeah, every extreme is on the same team. Every extreme is on the same team. Every extreme is on the same team, except in the way that proves horseshoe theory.